Happy Monday. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. We hope everybody out there had a tremendous Thanksgiving Day weekend. And guess what, Matt? We're back in the swing of things. Back to 5 days a week this week.
For some reason, I thought you were going to say new. I'm going to have to hold the mic, I guess. For some reason, I thought you were about to say when you said new week, for some reason, I thought you were going to say Happy New Year. I'm like, dude, that's like a month and a half away. You're a little early on that one, but no, yeah, it was pretty fun week. I'm going to have to hold this until I get it figured out, but it's a pretty fun weekend for myself. I did a little bit of traveling, but as a sports fan in Ohio, it was terrible. Outside of Ohio State winning the Emerald Coast Classic, taking down Alabama, getting a big win. Outside of that, sports was not fun over the weekend. Not at all.
You know, Matt, not to mention the fact you said that you hit the road, you had some travel. We talked about that a little bit. John Snyder and I did both. We were giving some explanations on why you were not here on Saturday. We had some people that missed you, including us. We missed you, Matt. But we're happy you're back. And, you know, what's interesting is that your travel that you had over the weekend, you went up to the Canton area for your family Thanksgiving, and that's where we're going to be once again this weekend for the state championships for high school football in the state of Ohio.
Yeah, it was funny. Right as I was leaving, I was telling my aunt and uncle, I'm like, it's kind of weird because I'm here this weekend, and literally in 4 days or so, I'm going to be right back to this spot because I remember last year when we were driving our way up to Canton, you missed an exit, and we actually drove down the road that you go on to get to my aunt and uncle's.
You don't have to mention me missing an exit, Matt.
No, for me, the funniest part was I pointed out, I was like, yeah, coming up on the right, there's a giant skeleton with a Myles Garrett jersey on, and then you look to the right as we're driving, and you're like, oh, yeah, I see that. That kind of just told you that I knew exactly where we were and that we were actually pretty close to it. But, yeah, it's interesting to know that I'm going pretty much right back to where I was this past weekend here in a few days, but comes with a job. It's pretty fun, though.
I'm super excited for it. We're going to see 7 tremendous games, including the Division II state final. Hoban, Massillon, Washington, this upcoming Thursday night. I believe it's a 7 o'clock kickoff. It's either a 7 or 7:30, but nonetheless, and not to mention the fact that Thursday's show, it's more than likely going to be live from Canton. So super excited about that. A lot of great things coming up for this show. Sports Now, the TKDS Sports Network coming up. But, Matt, we have a busy show. Obviously, last week, no show Wednesday, no show Thursday, no show Friday due to the holiday of Thanksgiving. So we took some time off. We were able to enjoy some time with our family. Much needed time off, but you know what? We're well rested. We're ready to go. And not to mention that, even though we took a little bit of a break for the holiday, sports did not. And that's point blank. Sports did not take a break for the holiday, and they never do. So anyway, we got a lot of catching up to do. And first off and foremost, it would be a crime in the state of Ohio or the state of Michigan, wherever you're from, if we did not talk about this game first and foremost. Michigan beats Ohio State for the 3rd straight year, 30-24.
Hey, I've said it multiple different times on this show, and I've said it multiple different times off the show. This year, it just felt like it was Michigan's year. The past few seasons, you had an argument, you had an idea that Ohio State had a pretty decent shot at winning the game, but didn't end up coming true the past 2 seasons. And then this past year, like I said, I mean, you also just take a look at what Michigan brings to the table on both offense and defense. There wasn't really many questions about what Michigan was going to be able to do on the offense and defense this season. Ohio State, on the other hand, it was always a question of what's the offensive line, how good is it going to be this season, how good is Kyle McCord going to be, and it ended up showing itself. Obviously, put into a situation where you need to move the football down the field, interception thrown late in the game. The real reason, though, that I truly believe Ohio State lost that game, the drive where Kyle McCord, the DB, ran Marvin Harrison Jr.'s route. Kyle McCord already knew where he was going to throw it. Threw it right to the DB, set Michigan up at the 5. They punched it in on 4th and goal. That's really the reason when you take a look at how the game played out. It's tough to say that Ohio State was guaranteed on that drive to march down the football field and get into the end zone or get a field goal out of that drive. But when you're facing off against number 3 Michigan and you give them 5 yards needed to get into the end zone, it doesn't matter how good your defense is. It's going to be tough to stop the Wolverines. And you take a look at the final score, lost by 6. You take away that interception, you take away that touchdown drive, the points off of turnovers. It's obviously going to change the way the entire game played out, but at 7 points off of turnovers makes it 24-23 Ohio State. So it was really a game, as I was watching it, that I had a feeling that the mistakes were going to be what the mistakes Ohio State were making were what was going to be causing Ohio State the game. And the 2 interceptions by McCord, like I said, that last one, I'm not putting that much against Kyle McCord on that last interception. You've got a minute to march the football down the field on the road in the game to win it for your team. You get hit as you throw the football. You're trying to get it to your playmaker, Marvin Harrison Jr. As you get hit, you throw the football a bit short. Defensive back reacts to the ball being underthrown, gets picked off. Those kinds of things are going to happen. It's tough, especially, like I said, when you're going on a game-winning drive trying to march the football down the field, especially with how Kyle McCord has been struggling this season. I mean, we saw him do it against Notre Dame, but on the road, the game, toughest game you're going to play all season long, it's tough for anybody to get out on that football field and try to get a game-winning drive in your biggest rivalry game of the season, your last regular season game of the year, and with such a hostile crowd going against you too.
And Matt, you mentioned one thing. You mentioned the turnovers and the mistakes for the Ohio State Buckeyes in that game, and that's ultimately what do we talk about multiple times many times on this show? If you want to win football games, you cannot turn the football over. That's exactly what Ohio State did. They turned over the football 2 times, both Kyle McCord's interceptions. And no matter if you want to chalk up the last one his fault or the first one his fault or both of them his fault or neither of them his fault, yada, 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 yada. The point stands that Ohio State, they turned over the football 2 times. Michigan took care of the football. No fumbles. J.J. McCarthy, a perfect game through the air. No fumbles whatsoever. And Ohio State, 2 turnovers. They lost the turnover differential -2, and they lost by 6 points. They lost by 1 score. And you could just tell that the Ohio State Buckeyes, they hurt themselves in that game. They beat themselves in that game. And kudos to Michigan, because you know what great teams do? They take advantage of when teams hurt themselves. That's exactly what Ohio State did. Michigan, they're a great team. They're a good enough football team to realize, hey, we're just going to take care of the football. We're going to make the least mistakes. That's exactly what Michigan did. That's exactly why they ended up winning. And not to mention the fact that Ohio State, this has been a common theme from them all season long. The Ohio State Buckeyes, it seems like their offensive inconsistency. That defense has been great all year long. Obviously, they have not gone up against a high-powered defense or offense, I beg your pardon, such as the Michigan Wolverines. Yeah, they've played Notre Dame. Yeah, they've played Penn State. But when you look at offense, Michigan, that's the best offense. That's the best team in general that they've faced all season long. And there's no doubt about it. Ohio State, their problem all year long was the offensive inconsistency. They started to look better against Michigan State a few weeks ago. They looked better against Minnesota. It looked like Ohio State was turning that curve. But obviously, when you run into a tough Michigan Wolverine defense, they gave the Ohio State offense fits, not just even those couple of interceptions, but there were also quite a bit of plays where it could have gone for a couple more yards, but Michigan's defense right there, they were great in open field tackling. And again, you just got to tip your cap to the Michigan Wolverines. They wanted that game. They were favored to win that game. You mentioned it. That's a game that they should have won. 3 straight years for the Wolverines, and Ohio State, now their playoff hopes. We're getting to all the college football playoff scenarios coming up later in the show, so I'm not going to go too much into detail on this, but now it's going to take a lot for Ohio State to find themselves in the Final Four.
And yeah, the one thing that part of me agrees with it, but part of me doesn't agree with it, is the updated AP Top 25. You've got Ohio State on the road in the biggest rivalry game in all of college football, being number 2 going into that game, losing by 6. They dropped from 2 to 6 after that game. They dropped below. I would say you have an argument to put Florida State ahead of them because Florida State's still undefeated, but I think if you take a look at Oregon versus Ohio State, I'm not saying Bo Nix wouldn't show why he's arguably going to be the Heisman winner, but you just take a look at the fact that Oregon's losses to Washington, close game. Ohio State's loss to Michigan, close game. Then you got to take a look at the resume for the rest of the season for these 2 teams. Oregon, they've taken down teams such as Oregon State. Oregon State has dropped all the way down to roughly 22nd. I think they're put in 22nd, but they're tied. It says they're tied with NC State for 21st. So I'm going to say they're 22nd because they have them below them on the list. But you take a look at Ohio State. Beat Notre Dame, who's 16 right now. Beat Penn State, who's 10. It's just a little surprising that Ohio State, after a 6-point loss on the road against their biggest rival, against Michigan, the number 2 team in the country, drops them all the way down to the second best one-loss team in the country. I'm not saying Oregon doesn't deserve to be a top 5 team, because they really do. I think if there's any team in the top 5 right now that doesn't really deserve to be there, is Florida State. But you take a look at the reason why Florida State's inside the top 4, they're undefeated. Since they're undefeated, that doesn't surprise me too much that they're inside the top 5. But I don't know. It also makes sense more because there's a lot more teams competitive and a lot more teams towards that who can make it into the college football playoff than not. But it's a little surprising seeing Ohio State, especially with how good they played. They even outgained Michigan in that game too. Dropped from 2nd all the way down to 6th.
And Matt, it's going to be interesting to see now what the college football playoff rankings are going to come up with this upcoming week. And obviously, championship week is going to play a big factor in this one. And we've talked about this multiple times on this show. We said that in years past, heading into this week, you pretty much already know at least maybe 2 or 3 of the playoff spots that are going to be filled. This year, it's so up in the air. Like, you look at the championship, as your mic's falling again.
I said it. I left it alone, and it stayed for like 2 seconds. That was probably pretty funny for whoever was watching that, because I sat there like, oh, it's good.
Coming out the corner of my eye. Nonetheless, I mean, you look at all the conference championships coming up this week, and you have your teams that you win, you're in. There's no doubt about it. If Georgia wins, they're in. If Washington wins, they're in. If Michigan wins, they're in. But you look at who they play, it's a lot easier said than done. And again, we're getting all of the college football playoff scenarios coming up. Let's circle things back to the Buckeyes and Wolverines game. And obviously now Michigan, winners of 3 straight. Ryan Day struggling with the game. And we'll talk about Ryan Day here in the next 15 minutes or so. But Matt, you look back at some of the decisions and you look back at how that game went. What could Ohio, outside of the turnovers, take us through that game? What could Ohio State and that Buckeyes offense or defense do better to take down the Michigan Wolverines? To me, that touchdown pass that comes to mind, it was under review, and it was the touchdown pass in the second quarter. J.J. McCarthy put that one on a rope. It was a beautiful throw, absolutely beautiful throw, but he was bobbling it in the end zone. And to me, Matt, that looked like an interception.
Well, I'm going to have a little bit more bias towards why I think it should have been an interception, is because you might say, oh, he's only thinking it because he's a Buckeye fan. But to me, the way I see that is if it was ruled an interception on the field, it would have stood as an interception on the field. I think with that play, with how close it was and how questionable it was, whether or not Roman Wilson had held onto the football or whether or not the ball was intercepted by Denzel Burke, it was just a question of, and it would have really depended on what the ruling on the field was. It was called a touchdown. The reason I don't see there being too much of an argument as to why it didn't get overturned is because I don't think there was 110% concrete evidence to prove that it was an interception. And if it was called an interception on the field, I don't know if there would have been 110% it's confirmed to have been a touchdown to overturn the call. So obviously, it was ruled a touchdown. It's in there's nothing we can do about it now. Us talking about it right now isn't going to change what ended up happening, but the fact that it was ruled a touchdown on the field, I think that's what gave it to Michigan and what caused it to end up officially being a touchdown, because it's safe to say that during that play, there was a lot of question marks around whether or not Roman Wilson held on to the football all the way through, and that's why, to me, I felt like it personally should have been ruled an interception, is because holding onto the football on your side with 2 hands while it was being ripped out of your hands, I don't know how that constitutes possession, but it had to have, since it was ruled a touchdown.
And Matt, I completely agree with you on that. I think that the reason why that call was not changed was because, remember, you need clear-cut evidence to overturn a call. If you don't have clear-cut evidence, obviously, the call is going to stand what the call was on the field. And I think that's where we see that situation come into play. You look at it from at least my angle, I think it should have been called an interception. But obviously, when you look at that play in slow motion and fast motion, it's a lot different. And it's hard to call that bang bang on the field. So obviously the officials, they call it a touchdown on the field. They go back and review it. And I think, like I said, I would have thought that would have been changed to an interception, but I understand why they never called that an interception, because remember, when you review a play, you need 100% clear-cut evidence to overturn the call, and it was clear as day that the officials did not have that clear-cut evidence. It was a very close call, and therefore, that's why you just stick to your gut. You just stick to your gut and you stick to the call on the field. I think it should have been an interception, but again, I understand the reason why it was not an interception. Again, it just comes down to evidence. There wasn't enough evidence to overturn the call.
And yeah, like I was saying, if it was ruled an interception on the field, I don't know if there would have been really 100% concrete evidence to have overturned it and turned it into a touchdown. So that play, it just felt like it was going to be whatever was ruled on the field is going to be what's ruled on the field, and review's not going to really be able to do much to try to change it or really be able to do much to change it because, like I said, it was when it came down to whether or not he crossed the goal line with possession of the football or he had possession of the football while in the end zone, it was a question of, is that possession? Is it not possession? It's not. During the game, it wasn't, oh yeah, he definitely did not have possession of that football. So that's where the whole argument of, was there enough to overturn it? Was there enough concrete evidence to overturn it? That's why, to me, I understand why it was ruled on the field as a touchdown, is because, like I said, when you take a look at how that play panned out, it wasn't a, oh yeah, that ball's not in his hands anymore. There's no way he had possession of that football when he was in the end zone. So that's how I see it. It was going to come down to what the ruling on the field was. Like I said, if it was an interception, it probably would have stayed an interception. Since it was a touchdown, it stayed a touchdown.
And with that all being said, we're going to take a small break. We're going to be back here in just a few moments. We'll continue this talk, Ohio State, Michigan, the game, the rivalry, coming up when we return.
At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir. I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir. I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
.20 the time here on this Monday afternoon, the Monday after Thanksgiving. Happy Cyber Monday, by the way. Completely forgot it was Cyber Monday. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington as we welcome you back here to Sports Now. We're talking about Ohio State football and the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. Obviously now Ohio State losers of 3 straight against the Michigan Wolverines. And now there's a lot of debate that's been coming up around the college football world and around the Ohio State fan base. Remember, Urban Meyer, 7-0 against the Michigan Wolverines. Ryan Day, so far, his tenure with the Ohio State Buckeyes, he struggled against Michigan. But obviously, I'm not going to hold that completely against Ryan Day because Ryan Day has gone up against better overall Michigan teams than Urban Meyer had to do so. But obviously, now there's a lot of controversy. Matt, do you think Ryan Day could be on the hot seat, or do you think he gets another year? Because me personally, I'll give my reasoning in a second. I think he's going to stay at Ohio State for at least one more year to try to take down the Wolverines in his fourth season.
To me, my opinion on Ryan Day is absolutely not. He should not be on the hot seat. And one of the reasons that I think that should be the case and why I don't think Ryan Day should be on the hot seat, take a look at Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Started off, 0-4 against Ohio State? He's won the last 3. For Ryan Day, won the first one, lost the last 3. It's not to say that it's guaranteed in the next few years Ryan Day is going to turn it around and Ohio State's going to start dominating Michigan again. But it's tough to, especially with the rivalry being as big as it is, it's tough to say that just because a coach is struggling at one point, like I said, Jim Harbaugh is a perfect example. You take a look at how he struggled at the start, how Jim Harbaugh struggled against Ohio State at the start. Everybody wanted to get rid of him. Everybody at Michigan wanted Harbaugh gone because he could not beat Ohio State. The same is kind of happening with Ohio State fans right now. Myself not being one of them. I still love Ryan Day. I want him to stay as Ohio State's head coach. But everyone is going ballistic and they're going berserk saying, fire Ryan Day, get him out of there. He should not be Ohio State's head coach. The other thing you also have to keep in mind with Ryan Day as well, you take a look at back during the Urban Meyer days. There wasn't really much question as to how good the Ohio State Buckeyes were. They were a dominant team on both offense and defense, and you take a look at what Ryan Day has had with Ohio State. 2 seasons, the past few seasons for Ohio State, defense did not seem to exist for the Ohio State Buckeyes. It was even said that, or it was even talked about that Ohio State's defense sometimes had the mentality of our offense is so good, we don't have to play defense as good because our offense will go back out on the field and score points for us. So the first 2 years that Ohio State lost to Michigan, that was the mindset of the defense. The defensive mindset was, well, not too much the second year Ohio State lost because that's when Jim Knowles was in for his first year and it didn't end up panning out too well, but that's because we talked about the biggest question, and really when it comes down to it, like I said, I don't want to throw too much shame towards Kyle McCord because everyone's talking about how terrible of a quarterback he is, and he's really not terrible. He's not a bad quarterback. He's not throwing like 20 interceptions on the season and only throwing 13 touchdowns. He's not been terrible all season long like people are saying he is. People are saying he's probably one of the worst quarterbacks in the entire country. That is just not true. Ohio State, and I'm not saying that it was only the playmakers doing it, but some of the throws Kyle McCord was making were pretty good throws this season that not a lot of quarterbacks can do. So when it comes down to should Ryan Day be on the hot seat, I don't think so. And the other, like going back to the whole me talking about the offense being not as good, you take a look at some of the quarterbacks in the past at Ohio State. You've got, let me list off a few. Troy Smith, Braxton Miller, J.T. Barrett, Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, C.J. Stroud. There's a few more that I didn't mention, but there's a lot more. There's a lot of Ohio State quarterbacks when you take a look at from around the 2000s to now, you take a look at what all those quarterbacks brought to the table. Like I said, I'm not saying Kyle McCord's a terrible quarterback, but he definitely does not bring assets to the table like C.J. Stroud did, like Justin Fields did, like Dwayne Haskins did, when Cardale Jones was the quarterback for a little bit, when J.T. Barrett was the quarterback, Braxton Miller, Troy Smith. There's a lot of quarterbacks in the recent memory for Ohio State that played at such a high level. I think that's one of the reasons why everybody's dogging on and trashing on Kyle McCord is because he's a great quarterback, but he's not at the level of quarterbacks like C.J. Stroud were for Ohio State, like Braxton Miller was, like J.T. Barrett was, like Justin Fields was. And I'm not saying that that means Kyle McCord is a terrible quarterback. he's just not as good and is not as talented as everybody else that's been at Ohio State in recent memory. So I'm not saying Kyle McCord's a terrible quarterback, but he's not at the level of what we've seen Ohio State quarterbacks in years past.
And Matt, you took the words right out of my mouth. When you have Kyle McCord, you look at the numbers and you look at how he's grown through his career as the Ohio State Buckeyes starter. He's definitely grown, and he's grown into that role. And by no means is he the worst quarterback in the country. Is he a top 4 or 5 quarterback in the country? No, he's not. But you look at the past quarterbacks that the Ohio State Buckeyes have had. When you have a guy like C.J. Stroud, and we look at what he's doing in the NFL, Matt, even 2 weeks ago, we were talking about him being in the NFL MVP race as a rookie. You look at what Justin Fields brought to the table for Ohio State, Dwayne Haskins. Ohio State has been blessed and spoiled at the same time with great quarterbacks at the collegiate level. Now you have a quarterback that comes in. He was more house grown, whereas, remember, obviously, Justin Fields, he was a transfer from Georgia. C.J. Stroud, he was house grown as well, but remember, he was able to sit under Justin Fields for about a year, and not to mention different play styles. What's great about Ohio State is that their quarterbacks over the last couple of years, they've had different play styles. And Kyle McCord, no different to that scenario and that stereotype as well. When you look at how Kyle McCord has developed over the year, is he as good as those top quarterbacks? I'm not going to say he is. But does he have potential if he were to come back to Ohio State, if he were able to get the starting job again, and if he were able to grow, does he have potential to becoming a tremendous quarterback for the Buckeyes? Absolutely, he does. And again, Ohio State, they have been spoiled and blessed at the same time. It's a blessing that they've been spoiled with great quarterbacks at the collegiate level. And now swinging this back over to Ryan Day, Matt, I don't think that Ryan Day deserves to be on the hot seat as well. Yes, he's 1-3 against Michigan Wolverines. Yes, that is the biggest game Ohio State plays. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that will say, oh, well, it's the biggest game of the year, and if you're not winning the biggest game of the year, then we got to go elsewhere. You look at Ryan Day's numbers, he's 54-1 outside of any team not named Michigan and not in the college football playoff. 54-1. I understand they're playing a lot of teams that they should beat. They're playing teams such as Bowling Green. They're playing teams that they should beat earlier in the season. There's no question about it. There's no doubt about that. And they're playing some teams in the Big Ten that ultimately they should beat, like Purdue, like Maryland, like Rutgers. They're playing a lot of teams that they should beat. But you also look at who they've beaten over the last couple of years. They took down Notre Dame twice. They took down Penn State. They've taken down ranked opponents on their schedule. There's no question about it. Ryan Day can win at Ohio State. You mentioned Jim Harbaugh and his struggles against the Buckeyes through his first couple of years coaching. That's a great comparison. That is tremendous comparison. You look at his struggles and you look at what he's able to do it now. And not to mention the fact, this is a new Michigan team. I mentioned this a little bit ago. The Michigan Wolverines that Ryan Day is facing is a lot better than any Michigan Wolverine team that Urban Meyer faced. It's a different program. It's a different culture. It's a different team. They're getting higher recruits. Ryan Day, again, when you look back, 54-1 outside of against any team not named Michigan and not in the college football playoff. Hey, that's a win. Obviously, you struggled against Michigan. Michigan's become a better team. You look at his success in the college football playoff. Guess what? He made it to the national championship a couple years ago. And then last year, he went toe-to-toe with the number one team in the entire country, and unanimously the number one team in the entire country. And it came down to they had a chance to win that game, and it fell wide left. The field goal was wide left. Ryan Day, there's no question about it. He can coach. He can win for the Ohio State Buckeyes. The question is, just when can he turn that table for the Michigan Wolverines? I will say this, there's no question, in my mind, he should not be in the hot seat. But if this trend continues again next year, then I think you can start opening up that conversation.
And yeah, that was one thing that I was going to bring up, Jackson. You take a look at the playmakers and the positional players that Michigan is going to lose going into next season. They're going to lose a decent chunk of that offense. There's some of the defense that they're going to end up losing. More than likely, most of them are going to go to the NFL draft. So if there's a year that I think could put Ryan Day on the hot seat, obviously, Ohio State's probably not going to have Marvin Harrison Jr. next season. But there's also been...
They're wide receiver you for a reason.
Yeah. But the other thing that I want to talk about and bring up, and it's obvious that it's possible to be this way. It's also obvious that it's possible that Marvin Harrison Jr. might have just been talking up some of his players and making them feel a little bit more confident in themselves. But Marvin Harrison Jr. has come out and said that Carnell Tate, their freshman wide receiver, coming from Chicago by way of IMG Academy out of Florida, Marvin Harrison Jr. has come out and said that Carnell Tate might be better than me. Obviously, like I said, that could be Marvin Harrison Jr. just trying to hype up his teammates and making them feel a lot better about themselves and whatnot, but that's what you want teammates to do. You want teammates to lift you up, but with what Ohio State is going to be bringing back to the table next year and what they're going to be able to do next year when it comes to the team as a whole, if Ohio State loses next year to Michigan, you take a look at, obviously, recruits can come in from Michigan, and you never know. You could have a true freshman who ends up being an absolute animal and tears up every team they play against for the Wolverines, but that's never a given. But you take a look at what Ohio State's going to lose this upcoming season when it comes to the NFL draft or players graduating. You take a look at what Michigan's going to lose when it comes to players going to the NFL draft and players graduating. It swings towards Ohio State being a little bit of a, and I'd say stronger team, because like you said, Michigan has built a dominant program throughout the past couple of years. But you take a look at, like I said, on paper rosters, Michigan had the better team this year. Next year, that should be in favor of Ohio State, and they're at home next year too. So when it comes down to the Buckeyes, if they lose in the shoe next year, then I do think it is possible that we could potentially see Ryan Day we might see his seat catch on fire a little bit next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think next year is when you can start opening the conversation. This year, I don't think so. And I know that there were a lot of Buckeye fans out there that said this is their year because Harbaugh wasn't the head coach, but guess what? They're still from the same coaching tree. I mean, the coaches today it's a combined joint coaching staff effort every game, with or without Harbaugh. It's still the same coaching tree. With Harbaugh on the sidelines and with him not, they're still coached overall by Harbaugh. That's still who they've played for the entire year. I just think that that's a void argument as well. But nonetheless, that's neither here nor there. More college football talk coming up when we return next on Sports Now.
It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Just another reminder, we are live in chat here on this Monday afternoon. Make sure to drop your comments. Matt, we actually received one comment. Maybe UC should hire Day if OSU doesn't want him anymore.
Well, I want him, so hopefully he stays a Buckeye.
We're talking about the Cincinnati Bearcats. They finished out their season 3-9. We'll talk about them here in the very next segment. But first, let's move into the college football playoff. And obviously, there are a lot of different scenarios that you can have with the college football playoff. And obviously, Selection Sunday is this Sunday. So this time next week, we will know the teams that are heading to the Final Four. But Matt, like I said earlier in the show, it seems like heading into championship week, you already know one or two teams, three teams that are already punched their ticket. They're in no matter what. Now, this year, you have some teams that when you're in, when you need some help, and then you also have some teams that are not in the conference championship that if everything goes their way, they can maybe find a way to sneak in. Very unlikely. That would be the Ohio State Buckeyes. It's very unlikely, but at the same time, the college football playoff this year, 4 teams can make it, but we've talked about this multiple times on this show, Matt. There's about 8 deserving teams to make it, and you maybe be able to make an argument for more as well. This college football playoff, I mean, think about all the scenarios you have. You have Georgia, if they win, they're in. Washington, they win, they're in. Michigan, they win, they're in. You have Florida State that's still in the mix, but obviously missing their quarterback, but their backup quarterback has stepped up. Big win against Florida on Saturday night, 24-15. And then you also have Texas on the outside. If they win, they're going to need some help. If Oregon wins, you can make an argument that they'll be in as well. I would say that Oregon would be in with a win because they would take down Washington. Alabama, they win. My opinion, they're in over Georgia. But then you also have that full circle where, guess what? Texas beat Alabama. So if Alabama knocks out Georgia and Texas wins the Big 12, then does Texas jump Alabama and do they get in and SEC falls out? There's just so many different scenarios that can play out this week. And this is what we love about college football. And it seems, and this, we've talked about this multiple times on the show. This is the final year of the Final Four. Next year starts the start of the 12-team playoff for college football. And it seems like all these teams, they were already prepping. They're recruiting to get players into that 12-team playoff format. And we still have a 14 playoff format this season. In the decade that the college football playoff has been around, they certainly saved the best for last when it comes to the 4-team. Because again, next year goes to a 12-team. And a 12-team playoff this year would have just simplified all of the equation a lot more. But Matt, a lot can play out in conference championship week. I'm super excited about it. But again, this is the thrill. This is the excitement. This is what we love for college football.
Yeah, 100%. The only unfortunate part is there's a decent shot that my team probably won't make it into the college football playoffs this season. But still, when it comes down to the excitement about it, when it comes down to the reason why there's 4 teams in the playoff and the reason why there's so much chaos, and I wouldn't say anarchy, but you get the feeling that there is when it comes to this point of the season. But you just take a look, and the reason I like it so much this year is the fact that, like you mentioned, Georgia all the way down to Alabama, 1 through 8, all have legitimate arguments and legitimate reasons as to why they should be in the college football playoff. There's only one team in that top 8 that's not going to be able to play in a conference championship or a conference title game to try to prove and show everybody why they deserve to be in. That's Ohio State. You've got 3 versus 5 with Washington versus Oregon. You've got 1 versus 8, Georgia versus Alabama. You've got Michigan against Iowa, another top 20, Iowa right now at 18. And then I'm taking a look at the AP poll. College CFP rankings not out yet. Those are coming out soon. You got Florida State against Louisville. That's 4 versus 15. You've got a ton of crazy games. Texas, they've got Oklahoma State, who's currently 19 in the AP poll, but all of those teams all still have a legitimate shot of making it into the college football playoff. And you talk about roads for teams to make it into the college football playoff. Georgia wins, they're guaranteed a spot in. I would say Michigan with the loss probably still is going to make it in, but it's going to depend on what happens around them. The only way I wouldn't see them making it in is if Oregon beats Washington by maybe a few points and then Florida State destroys Louisville. I would say that might be the only way Michigan doesn't make it into the college football playoff. But Washington, Oregon, whoever wins that game, in my opinion, you lock yourself into the college football playoff. It doesn't matter if it's Oregon or if it's Washington. Whoever wins that game, you are in no matter what. If it's Washington, you're probably going to jump up to number 2, or maybe even, if they beat them badly, maybe even number 1, depending on what happens around them. Florida State, you win, you're in. For me, if Florida State loses, I think they're done. I don't think there's a chance they make it into the college football playoff if they end up losing. You take a look, Texas, if they win, I would say it's a tougher road for them to make it in. Alabama, if they win, I think you deserve to get a spot into the college football playoff. I'm not saying that drops Georgia out of the college football playoff, but I think that's the biggest crazy what-if factor is if Alabama beats Georgia. I think that would throw the biggest wrench into the mix when it comes down to potential scenarios. But another thing, too, you talk about Ohio State potentially making it into the college football playoff. Georgia wins, Michigan wins, Washington wins, Florida State loses. I think there's an argument. I think there's a chance Ohio State could end up making it in.
Absolutely. And one thing that you talk about wrenches being thrown in, but remember,
I feel like that's been the whole season.
Texas beat Alabama. So if Texas wins and Alabama wins, was that loss at the beginning of week 2? Does that loss favor Texas to get in? Or does Alabama make it because that was when Alabama was still figuring out their quarterback situation? There's just so much that can play out from this. There's so much that can play out for this. And I'm sure that on Saturday, at the end of the day, when all the college championships are done, we will have a better understanding. At least I hope so, that we'll have a better understanding on the 4 teams that get in. Matt, I will say this. Ohio State's chances to make the college football playoff is certainly a long shot. But if Iowa takes it to Michigan, and then just like you said, the scenarios lined out, if Georgia ends up beating Alabama, if Michigan loses, if Florida State loses, if Texas loses, then that may open the door for Ohio State to sneak back in. It's really just it's a catch-22, whichever way you look at it. There's so many different scenarios that can happen. And again, I've said this before. I'll say it again. This is the craziest championship week that we will see in college football history, because there is so much riding on every single game.
Oh, 110%. I mean, the other thing too, you take a look at the rest of if you were talking about, obviously next year it's going to be a 12-team playoff. You take a look at what teams right now, if it was a 12-team playoff right now, you would have Oklahoma being in at 12, Ole Miss at 11 being in, Penn State at 10 being in, Missouri at 9 being in, Alabama at 8, and then we've pretty much mentioned 1 through 8, so we already know where all those teams sit. But you talk about teams you talk about potential to maybe play a little bit of spoiler and talk about how crazy it would end up being. Iowa, they would be in control of their own destiny at 18. Louisville at 15, they'd be in control of their own destiny. Oklahoma State at 19, they would be in control of their own destiny. So I think next year it's not going to be, obviously I wouldn't say it's impossible to be as intense as it's been this season, but I think next year, if we see similar scenarios, Conference Championship Week is going to be a pretty big week as well.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a bit that has to play out. And again, the Buckeyes, they still have a chance. Is that chance? I don't know. It really just what this season has brought to the table for college football has just left me speechless. And we almost had a simplified version on Saturday, but Alabama decided to win it on a 4th and goal from the 25-yard line. That was an incredible finish, an amazing finish, and better yet, a beautiful throw by Jalen Milroe.
Yeah, that was not how I expected that game to end. Not at
But
all.
at the same time, it's the Iron Bowl. We talked about this a little bit before the show off air. The Iron Bowl, it seems like, has the best finishes in any college football rivalry.
Yeah. I mean, you got the kick six. You've got
the 4 overtime game back in 2021.
It's insane.
There's multiple you can mention. And now the Hail Mary 4th and goal. There's so many that you can mention. The Iron Bowl, a classic at hand, obviously. But yeah, nonetheless, we're going to take a small break. We'll be back here on Sports Now.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. We're talking college football. We got a couple more segments for college football before we shift our focus into the National Football League. Matt, we're going to start here. We know we're going to get to talking about the UC Bearcats, their 3-9 season. We're actually going to push that segment back one more. We're going to do that here to start hour number 2 at the 5 o'clock hour. But Matt, let's go in and let's talk about your updated Heisman watch and really the top 3 front runners right now for the Heisman. Obviously, Jaden Daniels comes to mind, 40 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 3,812 yards passing the football. The quarterback for LSU, Michael Penix, 32 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 1 yard shy of 3,900 yards on the season. The quarterback for the Washington Huskies. And then Bo Nix, 37 touchdowns, 2 picks, 3,906 yards, the quarterback for the Oregon Ducks. Matt, you and I were talking at the break. In my opinion, you can make an argument really between Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels being your front runner for the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah, and I think if there's any players that are going to be that have the best odds, I would say, of winning the Heisman Trophy, I'm not saying it's not possible for Penix to win it, but with what he's been able to do the past few weeks, he hasn't looked nearly as strong, I would say, when it comes down to how dominant his team has looked and how good he has looked throwing the football. It's safe to say he hasn't looked bad throwing the football whatsoever, but he's definitely not been at the level that we've seen Daniels playing for LSU and we've seen Bo Nix playing for Oregon. I would say if there's two players that have the best odds of winning it right now, it's Bo Nix and it's Jaden Daniels. Those are the two that have the best odds of winning the Heisman Trophy. I would say Penix is right behind those two. I don't know who would be fourth. It's really in the air because there's a lot of players that I think deserve that four spot to potentially be in the conversation and potentially be sent to New York for the Heisman Trophy. I mean, you've got an argument with what Jalen Milroe has been able to do recently. You've got an argument with what Marvin Harrison Jr. has been able to do all season long. There's just a lot of players. Like, the front three are obvious. The front three are obviously Penix, you've got Nix, and you've got Daniels. Those are obviously your front three. The big question is, who's number 4? Who else is going to New York? Who else is in that conversation to win a Heisman? But if there's two players that I think truly have the best odds of winning it, and I think one of these two players are almost, I wouldn't say guaranteed, but it's one of these two players that I think is almost guaranteed to win the Heisman Trophy, I think it's between Bo Nix and Daniels, to be completely honest with you.
And Matt, you can make an argument for both Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. Bo Nix, obviously the Heisman Trophy, it's like the MVP for college football. And when you look at the Heisman, what do they have to do? They have to elevate their team. And they have to elevate their team and push them to their full potential. With that description, I look at Bo Nix. Bo Nix, he has been able to push the Oregon Ducks over the top. And without Bo Nix, I don't think Oregon would be playing in the Pac-12 championship. Without Bo Nix, Oregon Ducks, they are nowhere near the playoffs. I'm not going to say that they're not a ranked team, but they're not in the conversation for being in the college football playoff, and they're not going and playing in a do-or-die game this upcoming week in Las Vegas. But you also look at Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels throwing the football this season, his stats, they're a little bit more eye-popping than Bo Nix. 40 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 3,812 yards. He's completed 72% of his completions. Obviously, you compare his passing numbers to Bo Nix, pretty similar. But look at his rushing numbers. 1,134 yards on the ground, 10 touchdowns using his legs as well, averaging 8.4 yards per carry. Those numbers, they stick out at you. Now this is really what it comes down to it. If you're going to base the Heisman Trophy off of a statistical standpoint, I think Jaden Daniels is your winner. But if you're looking at who has elevated their team the most, I think Bo Nix is your winner. So that's really where both argument comes into a factor. And really, you want to look at it as, really, who meant more to their team, Jaden Daniels or Bo Nix? Or are you looking at a statistical standpoint, and are you going to go Jaden Daniels or Bo Nix? That's really where this argument comes into place, and that's why I kind of introduced this segment. You piggybacked off of it, and you completely agree with it as well, that the top two frontrunners when it comes to the Heisman Trophy in college football is Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix.
And yeah, the other reason I think it should go more towards Bo Nix is because, I mean, obviously you take a look at the stats for Daniels so far this season, but another thing you also have to keep in mind and you also have to keep an eye out for, LSU kept Daniels in pretty much they've kept him in for a majority, like almost all 4 quarters of a majority of the games they've played in. Obviously, you're going to keep him in all 4 quarters in the games such as against Florida State, the games like they had against Ole Miss, Alabama. You're going to keep him in for those 4 quarters. But against Georgia State, he's throwing touchdowns in the 4th quarter. Bo Nix was pulled at the end of the half against Arizona State after throwing, I think it was 4 or 5 touchdowns in that first half. The Ducks have been pulling Bo Nix out of the game early in a lot of the games that he's been playing recently. This Georgia State game was 2 weeks ago, and Jaden Daniels was throwing touchdowns in the 4th quarter. I'm not saying that needs to be the end-all, be-all, but it's obvious that LSU, I'm not saying they're stat-padding Jaden Daniels' stats, but you also got to take into account the amount of time that both players have been playing on the football field. Obviously, like I said, Bo Nix versus Washington, he was in all 4 quarters. In games like that, you're going to have Bo Nix playing for a majority of the game. But against teams that you're beating, LSU's keeping Daniels in, Oregon is taking Bo Nix out. That's going to help the stats for one of those players, and it's going to hurt the stats for the other two.
Matt, you look at Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. If the season were to end today, who's your Heisman Trophy winner?
I don't like that you had to ask me this. If it were to end today, I would personally say
it's tough. You can go either way and be right.
I know it's super tough. I would say
obviously I wouldn't throw in a play. Obviously keep it between Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels.
yeah, those are the two that it's between for me.
Quinn Ewers. He's been great this season, but he's not in the Heisman conversation at this moment.
The Heisman Trophy should go to Travion Henderson after he was hurt for a few weeks. No, I would say right now, I'd probably give it to Bo Nix. I'm not, and that's not saying anything bad about Jaden Daniels because he has had an amazing season. But it kind of also boils down to what I said earlier. You take a look at the fact that they've kept Jaden Daniels out for a majority of the games, at least in the past few weeks, maybe to try to keep getting him more touchdowns. I'm taking a look earlier on in the season, too, against Grambling State. They had him in the third quarter throwing touchdown passes as well in that one. So when it comes down to you also brought up the impact that players have had. Bo Nix is really the reason that Oregon is in the college football playoff conversation. He's the reason that they are still a team that has a chance of winning the college football or winning the Pac-12 championship and making it into the college football playoffs. So I'm not saying that those are the main reasons, but I'm also looking at it from a standpoint of what if Oregon didn't take out Bo Nix? What would his passing stats be like? What would his rushing stats be like if they didn't pull him out halfway through some of the games that they were dominating in the first half of this season? And I think the fact that LSU keeping Daniels in for 3 to 4 quarters in games where a lot of teams would pull their starters out of, I think that's one of the reasons we see Jaden Daniels have as good a stats as he's had so far this season. And LSU, they're right around 14 right now. There's no talk and there's no chance they make it into the college football playoff. So I'm going to go with Bo Nix. But Jaden Daniels, I would say if you were to split the votes between the two of them, I would say 55% of the votes go to Bo Nix, 45% go to Jaden Daniels. It's very close, but I would go with Bo Nix.
And Matt, I guess I'm part of that 55% as well. I'm going to go with Bo Nix as well because as I mentioned opening up this segment, what does the Heisman Trophy have to do? And this is something you cannot look at the stat book and predict. This is something that you cannot make this assumption and talk about this by looking at the stat book. This is something that is not going to go in the stat book, but look at how Bo Nix has elevated the Oregon Ducks. Not that Jaden Daniels has not elevated LSU, because he certainly has. But again, we talk about individual awards, and this is a completely individual award, but both teams are putting up statistical numbers to be, and they're both putting up statistical arguments to be your Heisman Trophy winner. Look at what Bo Nix has done. This is not going to be in the statistics. This is not going to be in the stat books, but look at how he's been as a leader for the Oregon Ducks. He has led that offense for the past couple of years now. He has gone through the ringer, started at Auburn, transferred to Oregon. He's gone through the ringer, and he's elevated his team each and every year. Where would the Oregon Ducks be without Bo Nix this season? Are they ranked? I think so. That's a great program. They've always been a great program. Even going back a couple decades ago, they've always been a tremendous program. But you look at where would they be without Bo Nix? I think they'd be ranked. They would be nowhere near the college football playoff talk. I don't think that they'd be playing in a do-or-die situation this upcoming Saturday. Bo Nix has his team in position to succeed, whereas Jaden Daniels does not. That's really my main argument. Again, yes, it's not a team award. It is an individual award, but who has his team in position to compete and who does not? That's my main argument. Bo Nix, he's elevated his team. What would the Oregon Ducks do without Bo Nix? I love how you bring up the fact that he's also been pulled out of multiple games as well, whereas Jaden Daniels has been able to pad his stats a little bit, and there's nothing wrong with that. But really, it circles back around. Bo Nix, where would Oregon be without him? Ask that question, and you will find out who the true Heisman Trophy winner is. That's my prediction. That's my thoughts. That's my opinion. But obviously, this could change next week. If Bo Nix goes out in the Pac-12 championship and throws 3 interceptions, then it's it could be a completely different story we're talking about next week. But nonetheless, time for a break. Hour number 2 coming up next on this 2-hour show.
At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir. I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. At McAfee, we understand that life doesn't stop when something in your home breaks down. Our customers count on us to be there, ready when they need us.
Is there anything else you need from me?
No, sir. I have all the information I need.
Great, thanks. Just lock the door on the way out.
Thank you.
Let us get your home up and running again. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Hour number 2 of this 2-hour show. We're talking college football here. We'll shift our focus to NFL talk coming up here later in this hour. But let's go in and let's continue talking some college football. We're going to start with the UC Bearcats. The UC Bearcats, first year under head coach Scott Satterfield. Satterfield 3-9 to start the year, or to finish the year, excuse me. They were 2-1 to start the year. And it looked like all things were going well for the UC Bearcats at the very beginning of the season. But then a long losing streak. They got their first Big 12 victory against Houston, but then another losing streak to end the year. And the Bearcats finished the season 3-9. Remember, this is a team, this is a program. This was their first year in the Big 12. And not only is this their first year in the Big 12, this is a team that is just 2 years removed from a Final Four appearance.
And yeah, it's to say it's been a tough year for Bearcat fans, I think wouldn't do it much justice. You take a look at the start of the season. They started off 2-0. It looked like everything was going good for UC. It looked like the season was going to be pretty good for the Bearcats. Then the loss to Miami, that was probably, I would say, arguably one of the bigger crushing losses on this season for this Bearcats team. And I'm not saying that that loss sparked the downward spiral that we saw the Bearcats go on this season, but I mean, you just take a look from after that Miami game. 14-point loss to Oklahoma, 8-point loss to BYU, 20-point loss to Iowa State, 3-point loss to Baylor, 32-point loss to Oklahoma State, 2-point loss to UCF. They did get that win on the road against Houston, but talk about that being their first Big 12 win. You also have to take a look at the fact that Houston is also brand new to the Big 12, so I wouldn't say that is obviously it's an accomplishment getting your first Big 12 win.
Some
but
asterisks next to
yeah,
the win.
it's your, I would say, first Big 12 win, not first big Big 12 win. I would say the first big Big 12 win for Cincinnati would be taking down a team such as Iowa State, taking down a team such as Baylor, taking down a team that was already in that Power 5 conference before you joined. But you just take a look at, and you also have to take a look at all of the teams that are new to the Big 12 this season. UCF didn't fare too well. TCU was right behind them. TCU obviously not a new team, but I'm going from UCF down towards Cincinnati, who's in dead last in the Big 12. You had UCF, TCU, Houston, BYU, Baylor, Cincinnati. Of those 6 teams, 2 of them were former Big 12 teams. Every team above them, the top 8 teams all in the Big 12, they were there last year. All those teams inside of the top 8 of the Big 12. 9th place is the first team that is new to the Big 12. So talking about UC struggling, talking about how their season didn't go, how things were hoping to be played out for this Bearcats team, but you really just take a look at all the newcomers to the Big 12 this season. It was a rough road for pretty much everybody. I mean, if UCF 3-6 in conference, that was the best team that's new to the Big 12. It was a tough year for all of the new teams. UCF, Baylor, BYU, Houston, and Cincinnati. All 4 of those teams had pretty tough seasons so far this year.
And, not to mention now there's a lot of question. We talked about the question around Ryan Day earlier in the show. Now there's a lot of question behind Coach Scott Satterfield. And Satterfield, there was a lot of controversy when he was hired on to be the head coach for the Cincinnati Bearcats this season. A lot of UC fans did not necessarily like him. He's coming from Louisville, and Louisville, remember, he had some struggling times there as well. And there was a lot of controversy when Satterfield was named the head coach for the UC Bearcats. Matt, I will say this. We talk about this, especially at the college level. It takes some time for you to get your recruits in. You need to get your style of recruits into your system, and it takes a while to build a culture. You look at the Cincinnati Bengals, and this, I think, is a perfect example. Zach Taylor was not that great through his first couple of years, the year that they were tanking for Joe Burrow, and then the year that Burrow got hurt. And I understand that his outside record outside of Burrow, 4-20 again, outside without Joe Burrow. I know we'll talk about that later in the show. That's a little bit of a controversy as well. But you look at the numbers that they had on the years they didn't have Burrow, it takes time to build a culture. Zach Taylor did that for Cincinnati. The pro team, the Cincinnati Bengals, it takes time. Now, with that being said, with them being in the Big 12, transferring from the AAC to the Big 12, you're going to see a larger gap and a lot better competition to make it harder on a first-year head coach for the Cincinnati Bearcats, and the Bearcats who still are coming over to the Big 12 with their recruits from their AAC days. So I just hit the mic with my chin. I think that's the first time I've ever done that. But going back to what I was saying, it's not an easy task. It is not an easy task. So for Scott Satterfield to be struggling like he did so far this season, to be honest, I expected it. You need to give him time to get his recruits in. Once he gets his recruits in, then we will be able to tell how he is as a true head coach. I will say this, next year, I do think just because of how bad of a season the Bearcats had this year and how high of standards that the Bearcats have in their program, I do think Satterfield should and will enter the season on the hot seat. And he starts off 500, shows some improvement. Guess what? He'll keep his job. But I will say this, if they start off the year 0-4, 0-5, 1-5, 1-6, another struggling time to start the year, I think that may be all she wrote on Scott Satterfield and his time at Cincinnati. And a true test for that, Matt, will be that Week 3 matchup against the Miami Redhawks as well. Remember, that is their big rivalry game. UC, they have not lost to Miami in quite some time up until this year. And not to mention, that rivalry is going to continue, and it should. But it is a very bad look for the Big 12, for UC and the Big 12. UC, now in the Big 12, losing to a MAC school, that's a pretty bad look, not just on the Bearcats, but also on the entire conference. So, obviously, higher expectations for the Bearcats, higher expectations for the Big 12. Scott Satterfield, I do think he's going to enter the season next year on the hot seat. Do I think that the Bearcats need to part ways in the offseason? Not yet. They need to give him next year as well, see what he can do with his recruits. I'm not saying he's the guy, but I'm not saying he's not the guy. They need to give him at least some games next year. But again, a troubling start next year. If they put together another 3-9, 4-8 season, he'll be on his way out at the end of next season.
And yeah, I'm taking a look at UC's schedule for next year. You take a look at the schedule that they've got. They've got first few games of the season. They've got 3 home games, 1 road game. You've got Towson, you've got Pitt, you're at Miami, and then you've got a home game against Arizona State. Then you start the Big 12 play. You've got TCU, Houston, West Virginia, Colorado, Iowa State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and final game of the season is against UCF. For this Bearcats team, I would say 2-3 to start the season next year, 3-2 to start the season next year. Overall, I would say if Satterfield ends up staying the head coach for the entire season next year, if we see improvement by this UC Bearcats team, if we see them pick up the pace when it comes to the amount of wins that they get on a season, you take a look at what games next year you should expect UC to win. Obviously, against Towson, against Miami, those games should be wins for the Bearcats next year. Those games should be locked in. Those should be guaranteed wins. Pitt, you beat them this year. It's going to be tough to beat them again. You are at home for that game. Then you've got Arizona State. Arizona State, obviously, the Sun Devils struggled a little bit this year, but it's a chance to beat a Pac-12. Well, no longer Pac-12 because Pac-12 has pretty much exploded on itself. But still, when it comes down to tough competition and tough teams you're facing off against, Pitt, Arizona State, those are some pretty tough games for the UC Bearcats. Then you've got the conference play to start after that. So if they do start off 0-4, then I think you can start bringing up question marks and you can start asking the question of, should Satterfield be the UC Bearcats head coach? But it's kind of like you mentioned, Jackson. If you expect a brand new head coach from a different team to come in and immediately be successful, you're not thinking the right way. If you expect a coach that goes from Louisville to Cincinnati, or it really depends. It doesn't really depend. It doesn't matter what school a coach is transferring from another school to their new school, what school they're going to. If you expect them to immediately, and especially also with the fact that Satterfield went from the UC Bearcats being inside of the AAC to being inside of the Big 12 as well with his
a huge jump.
with his first year as a coach for this Bearcats team. But if you expect immediate success the very next season with a brand new head coach, being in a brand new conference, a tougher conference to play in, you're just, like I said, you're just not thinking with the right mindset. If you've got to wait, you've got to expect there to be some growing pains for a brand new head coach. The only argument you can have, and some people might bring up, well, why didn't Ryan Day struggle? He was already the offensive coordinator for Ohio State before he was the head coach. If you're built into if you were a coach of, say, the offense, defense, a position coach for a school, and you get bumped to the head coaching role, you already know what the culture's like. You've already potentially built a little bit of the culture yourself, and you already know what the team's about. You know everything that there is to do with that team. It's different when you go from Louisville to Cincinnati. It's a completely different team. It's a completely different mindset, a completely different change, and you got to expect some growing pains. If UC picks up the pace and does better next year, I don't think there should really be many questions about Satterfield. But if they struggle next year as well, then you can start getting the question marks of whether or not Satterfield should be the head coach for the UC Bearcats or not.
And you know, Matt, one thing that is also a very underrated aspect for this as well, and this is why I don't think UC should waste much time. Yes, Satterfield should get at least the start of the 2024 season. If he continues to, if he shows some improvement, then yeah, by all means, keep him, you know? But at the same time, if he does not show signs of improvement and if he struggles, then I think that they should have a shorter leash on Scott Satterfield, because being in a Big 12, a new school in the Big 12, it's going to be easier and harder to bring in recruits, if that makes sense. It's going to be easier to bring in recruits because, hey, you're in the Big 12, but it'll also be harder to bring in Big 12 recruits in general because you're in the cellar. You're the worst team in the Big 12. And so a lot of those schools, a lot of those players are going to look elsewhere to go play in if they want to play in the Big 12 as well. So, and not to mention, Satterfield this offseason is very important for him because if he tiptoes the line, if he struggles in the offseason If we see him lose the locker room at any point, which there has been some frustration in the locker room as well, if he loses the locker room at all, guess what's going to happen? All the star players they have now are going to hit the transfer portal. All the players that they have recruiting, they're going to go elsewhere. The Bearcats, when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to transfers, they are in some dark times right now. That is why it is so important this offseason that they rally together, they become closer, that culture is built in the locker room this offseason, and they start off good next year, because another troubling season for the Bearcats, that's only going to hurt them in the long run. Not just the coaching position, because now you're going to have to fill and look elsewhere from Scott Satterfield, but you're also going to have to look at new recruits. You're going to have to look at new transfers. You're going to lose quite a bit of your star players as well. And Matt, when you have a new coach come in, guess what? There's a down period. You got to build that culture. You lose Satterfield, you bring in a new coach. In the long run, it may be better, and that's why the UC Bearcats might do that if Satterfield struggles next year. But obviously, you want to avoid that, because you're pretty much ensuring at least another 1 to 2 more years of struggle after the 2024 season. Obviously, catch 22. It's going to be interesting to see what the Bearcats do. Time for a break. We'll be back.
It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Matt, we've talked about enough when it comes to college football. Actually, not really. We can talk college football all day long. It's well deserving to be talked about all day long, but we do have some other things we need to talk about on the show. Let's move our focus and let's talk about some NFL football. NFL football, we'll start with the Cincinnati Bengals. We just got done talking about the Cincinnati Bearcats. The Bengals, they lost the first start of Jake Browning's career, 16-10 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I will say this, somehow, some way, the Pittsburgh Steelers are 7-4. And they are in the playoff. Are they in the playoff picture now, or are they? They're close.
I think
they are.
They are either. I think right now they are either the. If it were to start today, I think they're either the 5 or the 6 seed. I don't know who would hold the tiebreaker between them and the Browns since they're 1-1 against each other on the season. I don't know. Nonetheless, they are in the playoff picture.
Kudos to Pittsburgh. Cincinnati struggling, losing 16-10. And Matt, going into that game, you know, there's a lot of talk with that game. And to be honest, with the Cincinnati Bengals, really all you can chalk it up to is it's a backup quarterback. You look at how Jake Browning played in that game. Statistically, no, he wasn't bad. He made some good throws, but he also missed a lot of opportunities. And when I say he missed a lot of opportunities, I'm not saying he threw the football downfield and then missed those opportunities. It seemed like there were a lot of plays in that game where he was timid to throw the football down the field. Matt, you and I were talking at the break late in the third quarter. He rolled out to his left side. He was sacked pretty bad. It was a pretty hard hit sack. But when you look downfield, Andre Yosevas was wide open. Joe Burrow, he's throwing that ball in the pocket, and it's a big 30-yard gain at least. Browning did not. And that's the difference between one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL and a backup quarterback. Browning at times yesterday, I don't think he looked all that bad, but I also don't think he looked all that great. Again, you could tell the difference between Joe Burrow and a backup quarterback. And when you have a star, and that's no dock on Jake Browning, that's just when you have a star elite quarterback such as the Bengals do in Joe Burrow, you're going to see that drop off unless your backup is Josh Allen. You know, you're going to see that drop off between the second best quarterback in the NFL behind Patrick Mahomes and a backup quarterback who's making his first ever career start, which again, you can't necessarily entirely blame that loss on Jake Browning. But Matt, one narrative I've seen floating around on the Twitter world is, so yesterday the Pittsburgh Steelers, for the first time in 58 games, had their first game of over 400 yards of total offense, and a lot of shades being thrown at the defense. To me, the defense only allowed 16 points. They got a turnover when they needed it. And not to mention the fact, Pittsburgh ran 68 plays and held the ball for right around 40 minutes of the game. When you run 68 plays and hold the ball for 40 minutes of the game, you should be getting 400 total yards of offense. And that's not just the Steelers, their offense, they looked significantly better without Matt Canada. I will give them that. But when you look at it, especially later in the game when the Steelers started to march the football down the field, the Bengals defense was exhausted. And it wasn't necessarily that the Bengals defense just could not get off the field against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was their offense was going out there and it was a 3-and-out or first down and then a punt. It was very minimal plays ran by the Bengals offense, very minimal first downs picked up. They did not convert well on third down yesterday. And when you look at the overall numbers, yes, the total yards will show issues on the defensive side, but I don't necessarily think that that's the defense's problem. Again, when you have the Bengals offense out there who runs under 40 plays and just cannot move the football down the field, that's a problem. That's a struggle. The Bengals' defensive struggles yesterday were set up by poor offense, not the other way around. The Bengals' defensive struggles yesterday were set up by poor offenses. And when you look at what the offensive scheme brought to the table, it just didn't get it done. You cannot blame the Bengals' defense for how they played yesterday, because at the end of the day, they only allowed 16 points. The Bengals' defense was not the problem. I've said it once, I've said it twice, I'll say it again. The Bengals' defense was not the problem. The Bengals' offense was the issue yesterday.
And yeah, if the argument is that it's the Bengals defense that's the problem, you held a team to 16 points that had 400 total yards of offense. If you're saying that it's the defense's problem, the offense only put up 10. If a defense is holding a team to 16 total points and they're allowing 400 total yards in the game and they only give up 16 points off of those 400 total yards, then it's not the defense's problem. It's not the defense that has the issue. The offense, obviously, without Joe Burrow, the Bengals offense is definitely not going to look like they would with Joe Burrow out on the football field. But like I said, if your defense is allowing 400 total yards, you would expect the score to maybe be 28-10, maybe 24-10, something along those lines, not 16-10, not making it to where it's a one-possession game and the Bengals still have a chance to come away with a win. So talk about the defense, and the other thing you also brought up as well, Steelers had the ball for over 37 minutes in that game when they were on offense. It doesn't matter what defense you have. It doesn't matter how good you are when it comes to your stamina. It doesn't matter how built and ready you are to play a full 4 quarters of football. If you're out on the football field for 40 minutes trying to play defense, it's going to wear you out. It's going to make it tough on your team. It's going to make you struggle. So you talk about and you bring up the idea that, it's the defense's fault. It's the defense's fault. The offense gets another drive put together where they march down the football field and don't go 3 and out, get a touchdown. Take a guess who wins this football game. It's the Cincinnati Bengals.
And Matt, another thing, 68 plays. That's what Pittsburgh ran. 68 plays. That's insane. Cincinnati, the offense, only gave the ball 8 times to Joe Mixon, but at the same time, Joe Mixon only 16 yards. The Pittsburgh Steelers clogged up every single rushing lane yesterday, and they truly made the Bengals one-dimensional. And I know that head coach Zach Taylor and the play calling and Brian Callahan, the offensive coordinator, they're getting a lot of backlash for when you have a backup quarterback in and you only give it to Joe Mixon 8 times. I understand that, but you also have to look at how the Steelers made the Bengals one-dimensional. There was nothing all game in the run game. And during the times that they ran the ball, 11 times total, they ran the football yesterday, every single time the hole was clogged up. Yes, it's a long game. You want to stick with the running game. You don't want to abandon it early, especially with a one-dimensional quarterback. But again, kudos to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They made the Cincinnati Bengals completely one-dimensional. If you wanted to beat the Steelers, there was no way you were going to run the football on them. And they made that known early. So there's a point in time where you have to abandon the run. That's what the Bengals did. They threw the ball more with Jake Browning. And again, it's not the offensive play calling or anything by any of those means or by those standards. It's the defensive scheme and the defensive game plan for the Pittsburgh Steelers certainly paid off.
And yeah, like you said, I mean, you just take a look at the overall stats on the game. Passing yards, 197 through the air for the Bengals. That's not terrible numbers, especially when you have a backup quarterback. 25 total rushing yards in the entire game. Obviously, you're not going to get, say, 100-plus yards on the ground when you only have the football for 22 in around 22 minutes and about 40 seconds or so during the game. But 25 total yards on the ground, if there's anything that the Bengals need to, and I wouldn't say it's that they need to really improve on it, because we've seen this Bengals running attack have games where it's looked really good, and then we've had games where we've seen the Bengals offensive running game look like it did against the Steelers. I'm not saying that needs to be the main focal point and the main fix for this Bengals team, especially with the fact that I think the main focus is getting Browning more confident to make those throws down the field like you mentioned. But it's also going to help with Browning making those throws down the field if they can get the run game going. That's one thing about the AFC North and the defenses we've seen from the AFC North so far this season. It doesn't matter if you're the Ravens, Browns, Steelers, or Bengals. It is tough to run the football against a team in the AFC North. There's no question about that.
And Matt, one thing I will also talk about the Cincinnati Bengals, and with their injuries this season, it just seems like the season, they're 5-6. They're 2 games now out of the wild card. It just seems like, unfortunately, this season is going to be a wash for the Cincinnati Bengals. They've struggled. They're on a 3-game losing streak. You're now without Joe Burrow. T. Higgins has missed time. You have had Sam Hubbard, who's missed time. Cam Taylor-Britt, he's missed time now. You have Jamar Chase, who hasn't been 100% this season. You have so many different... the Bengals, let's face it, they've been banged up this year. Injuries have certainly hurt them, which is a shame because when you look at what the Bengals were able to do when they were 100% healthy, they won football games. That's when they were on their 4-game winning streak. And they were beating good teams such as the Seahawks, such as the 49ers, such as the Buffalo Bills. We saw the Bengals at their full potential this season, but injuries derail them. And that's just, unfortunately, part of football. What I'm looking forward to is I'm looking forward to see how the Bengals approach this offseason. Because we talked about this a little bit on this show last week, Matt. The Bengals Super Bowl window on the current team that they had a couple years ago and the team that they went to the AFC Championship game with last year, that window has shut. Obviously, you have Jesse Bates, Von Bell, they've already left. Hayden Hurst has already left. Now you have Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, DJ Reader, Jadobe Awuzie, Jonah Williams, and quite a bit more up for contracts this season. This will be a brand new Bengals identity team next year. And the window for their Super Bowl, the Super Bowl window that they had with the current team they have, has shut. That does not mean that after this offseason they can reopen it. The Bengals, they have over $80 million of cap space that they can go out and spend. I look for them to re-sign maybe a player or two. But if they can beef up, especially their pass rush outside of Trey Hendrickson this season has been absolutely atrocious. If they can beef up their pass rush, they've already shown a lot of promise in the secondary with Dax Hill, with Jordan Battle, with DJ Turner, with Cam Taylor-Britt. Their secondary, very young, very inexperienced. They're going to continue to get that experience. Not to mention the fact that if you can go out, invest some money in a nice pass rusher, if you can invest some money in some depth to better combat these injuries that you're going to be dealt with throughout the season, and not to mention, I'd like to see the Bengals go out and get a tight end. It's been quite a long time. It's been a while since the Bengals have gone out and have gotten a playmaking tight end, such as a Travis Kelce caliber tight end, such as a Mark Andrews caliber tight end. There are quite a bit of tight ends in this draft class this year that the Bengals can go out and utilize. And the number one person that comes to mind, Brock Bowers from Georgia. Yes, he's got that ankle injury, but he'll be 100% ready to go next year. He's a name that comes to mind. Travis Kelce, or I beg your pardon, Patrick Mahomes, he has Travis Kelce. Lamar Jackson, he's got Mark Andrews. You have Brock Purdy. He has, in the 49ers, they have George Kittle. The top teams in the NFL have a top tight end in the NFL. It's time for the Bengals this season to go out and get one. They dropped the ball last year. Sam Laporta was on the board. Michael Mayer was on the board. They had quite a bit of tight end options last year that they can go for. They did not go for it. This year, the Bengals have to pursue for one. And like I said, the Bengals, if they run their offseason perfectly, yes, their window may be shutting on the team, the current team that they have right now, but that Super Bowl window can just completely reopen next year if they go through the offseason how they are supposed to. The Bengals, under Joe Burrow, he's gone out and said the window is his entire career. I completely agree with that. You got the quarterback. You can build around him. The Bengals, they got the quarterback inked in now for a long-time contract. It's going to be interesting to see how the Bengals approach the offseason. I'm not wanting to start talking about the offseason so far because we're only heading into week 13 next week. Bengals are 5-6. But obviously, that's got to start coming on the minds of all the fans, all the personnel as well.
And yeah, I think right now this Bengals team definitely does need, and if they're not going to pursue one of the top tight ends coming out of college football, they need to consider looking at some tight ends to maybe pick up in the free agency market this upcoming season, because another tight end you didn't even mention, Goddard in Philly with Jalen Hurts. He's got Goddard, who's pretty good tight end with what he's been able to do in Philly so far this season. There's just, I mean, you just take a look also, even for Dak Prescott. He's got a couple tight ends in Ferguson and Schoonmaker down there that are playing pretty well for the Dallas Cowboys. So it's not that the Bengals aren't going to be able to do it without a quality tight end, but it just helps the team so much more if you've got a solid tight end that can open up the middle of the field to where they're drawing some coverage from linebackers. They might be opening up some underneath routes if they're running a deeper route down the field over the middle. There's so much that a tight end can do that not a lot of people like talking about, especially, I mean, you talked about George Kittle. You take a look at what he's able to do running routes over the middle of the field. You take a look at what he's able to do running routes down the sideline. And then you take a look at how physical he is blocking for the San Francisco 49ers. it's tough to get a tight end who plays at the level and plays with the ferocity and the intensity that George Kittle plays with, because there's not a lot of I would say in the entire NFL, there's not a lot of players that play at the level and play with the intensity and the ferocity that George Kittle plays with. Now, I'm not just talking about,
to watch.
I'm not just talking about tight ends. I'm talking about overall players in the NFL. It's tough to find players that have that much determination, have not just that intensity, but that much fun playing football too. So it's tough to say that anybody in this upcoming draft class can be a George Kittle style tight end who have that much impact in the game, have that much intensity, have that much playmaking ability, because it's George Kittle. But like you mentioned, Mahomes, he's got Kelsey. I brought up Jalen Hurts. He's got Goddard. You take a look. Right now, it was Kirk Cousins with Hawkinson. Now it's Dobbs with Hawkinson. And Hawkinson's been good for both Cousins and Dobbs so far this season. So you take a look at the top tight ends, how successful those teams have been. It's not saying that every good team needs a good tight end, but it definitely helps a lot more than it hurts.
And, not to mention the fact that that'll also help with the blow if Tyler Boyd were to leave in free agency, if T. Higgins were to leave in free agency. It would help out a lot if you were able to get another tight end, or a tight end that can ultimately make plays. I love Tanner Hudson. One thing I'd like to see the Bengals do, keep him, maybe go to a 2 tight end set in the future, especially if you're going to be losing Boyd and Higgins. It'll be interesting to see how the Bengals approach the offseason. 5-6 playoffs, so their playoff chances desperately starting to slip away. Time for a break. We're talking about the other team in the state of Ohio, the Cleveland Browns, coming up next when we return to Sports Now.
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help. Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe.
And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help. Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
We welcome you back here to Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. We just got done talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's go in and talk about the Cleveland Browns. The Browns losers in Denver. And how about a run the Denver Broncos have been on? 5-game winning streak? here we are. They're right back in the playoff picture as well. 6-5, just when everybody thought Denver was out to dry. Here they are, back in the playoff picture. Not necessarily in the playoff picture, but they're in the hunt. Cleveland, though, tough loss. Not to mention, they now have some bigger issues outside of that loss. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DTR, their quarterback, took a huge hit later in the game. P.J. Walker had to come in and finish the game. Myles Garrett was banged up a little bit as well. And the Browns, it now looks like the Cleveland Browns injuries are starting to pile up as well.
Yeah, that game hurt quite a bit, being a Browns fan. I mean, you take a look at the points that the Broncos defense helped Denver get. Touchdown off of a turnover, field goal off of a turnover, and then a safety. That's 12 total points that the Broncos ended up getting off of their defense making plays. You take those turnovers away, you take those issues away. It was also a -2 when it came to the turnover margin for the Cleveland Browns in that game. They turned the ball over 3 times. The Broncos, they only fumbled the football 1 time during that entire game. But you just take a look at the struggles the Browns had. The offense didn't look horrible. The stats weren't horrible for the offense. It was just the turnovers. That was the big issue for the Browns offense. And the other issue for the Browns offense, a player you didn't mention, Amari Cooper, also dealing with a rib injury after that game. Myles Garrett, I just saw something that he's day-to-day with that shoulder injury that he suffered in the game against the Broncos. So yeah, the Browns got pretty banged up. And the other thing that is unfortunate for the Browns, too, is the fact that, like you mentioned, Denver is 5-0 in their last 5 games. They are now officially in the hunt for the postseason. That loss, it could potentially be a tiebreaker that the Browns don't have come postseason time.
And Matt, you take a look now at the overall AFC North, and it looks like Baltimore is starting to run away with this division. Baltimore, a big win. Last night, they now have a 2-game lead, or a 1.5 lead, because they have yet to have their bye week. So obviously, Cleveland, Pittsburgh still in the mix of things, but the way it's looking like Baltimore is starting to run away with this division. So really the easiest path now to the playoff is the wild card for the Cleveland Browns. And you look at how stacked the wild card is going to be this season. Obviously, you have the AFC East. Whoever doesn't win the AFC East, in my opinion, is going to earn a spot, whether it be the Dolphins or the Bills, especially the Bills proving yesterday that they can still hang with some of the top teams in the league. Yes, they're 6-6. Yes, they haven't had a great start, but they have looked very, very good since they've fired their offensive coordinator a couple weeks. I think that the Bills are going to have some magic here in the later stages of the season. And then, not to mention, the loser of the AFC South, the Texans. We've talked about how great they've been so far this season. Pretty easy schedule coming up for them. And then the Jaguars, if they end up winning the division, or even if they don't, I don't think that they slip out of the playoff. So really, in my opinion, that leaves one more playoff spot left. And you take a look at who is going to be fighting for that playoff spot. You have Cleveland, you have Pittsburgh, you have Indianapolis. Denver has found their way back into the playoff picture as well. And Matt, you look at those teams, to be honest, in my opinion, I think Pittsburgh's got the best chance. We talk about Pittsburgh, their struggles so far this season, but look at their upcoming schedule. The Pittsburgh Steelers have the easiest upcoming schedule out of any of those teams that I just mentioned. You look at Cleveland's upcoming schedules at Los Angeles. Healthy Rams team, that's a tough team to beat. Jacksonville, Chicago, at Houston, then the New York Jets, and then the Cincinnati Bengals as well. Cleveland, I'm not saying that they have a super tough schedule, but compare that schedule to Pittsburgh's schedule, it is going to be a very, very tough way for the Browns to, especially if injuries start piling up for Cleveland, with them losing that tiebreaker over Denver. Obviously, yes, it helps. They have that tiebreaker over Indianapolis, but Cleveland, they're going to have to go into this last stretch of the season. They're going to have to take down teams such as Houston if they want a chance, such as Jacksonville if they want to have a chance. This is a must-win game, in my opinion, for the Cleveland Browns in Los Angeles this upcoming Sunday. I think it's a big game for Cleveland. When you look at overall records, yes, maybe it's not a must-win game, but when you look at the morale of the team, I think that this is a must-win game for Cleveland. This is a big game for Cleveland coming up. They still control their own destiny, which is great, but you get the sense that another slip-up or two, with how stacked the AFC is this season, there are multiple teams that can come in and swoop a playoff spot away from the Cleveland Browns.
And yeah, you said if the injuries pile up for the Cleveland Browns, I'll tell you one thing, they already have. The injuries for the Browns have been piling up pretty much all season long. Losing one of their best offensive linemen early in the season, losing Nick Chubb in game 2 of the season, losing Deshaun Jackson recently, Myles Garrett now day-to-day, one of the main linebackers, Walker, he's been questionable. He's been dealing with injuries pretty much all season. The safety positions, they've been dealing with injuries for a majority of the season. Denzel Ward has had a game or two where he's missed. There's been a lot of injuries for this Browns team so far this season. Amari Cooper, one of the top, not one of the top receiver for the Cleveland Browns. He now dealing with a rib injury. To say that the Browns, if they deal with injuries throughout the remainder of the season, I think hopefully, the Browns have already had their fair share of injuries this season, and hopefully it doesn't continue to stack up. But you just take a look at the schedule for this Browns team. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility for the Browns to make it into the postseason this year. You mentioned they've got the Rams. Currently, if the playoffs were to start now, they would be one of the first teams out of the playoffs in the NFC. They currently sit at the 9 spot. But you just take a look at healthier Rams team at home against a Browns team that dealt with quite a few issues and injuries in that game against the Broncos. I think it's safe to say that the odds and the hopes of the Browns being one of the better teams when it comes to the wild card spot and potentially being a 5 or a 6 seed in the wild card, I think it's going to be tougher for the Browns to stay there. I could even, especially with all the injuries that have stacked up, I could even see it being completely possible. And I despise saying this because I'm a Browns fan. I could completely see it being possible the Browns miss the playoffs this season with the amount of injuries that they've been dealing with.
And one thing that's going to play a factor for the Browns is going to be how long do these injuries pile up? If Myles Garrett, he's back this Sunday. If Amari Cooper doesn't miss much time, if DTR doesn't miss much time, but even with the DTR missing time, the good news for Browns fans, PJ Walker won games for the Cleveland. We just got done talking about the Bengals. The PJ Walker has won games for the Cleveland Browns earlier this season. When Deshaun Watson was hurt earlier in the year, P.J. Walker came in. He was the guy over DTR. That wasn't a start, but DTR struggled. And then P.J. Walker came in, and they won games with him. So the Browns have proven that they have enough around that beg your pardon, I made another mistake, that P.J. Walker can win games. And if DTR comes back, that they can also win games with him. So I'm not as concerned by the quarterback position because the Browns have already proven they can win with DTR and they can also win with PJ Walker. What I'm more concerned about is how long is Amari Cooper going to miss? How long is Myles Garrett going to miss? And we already talked about the injuries to Nick Chubb and that the Browns have faced so far this season. If they can stay healthy the rest of the year, I think that this is still a playoff team. But if the injuries continue to pile up like the common trend that we've seen for Cleveland the last couple of weeks, then I think that they're going to end up on the outside looking in. The good thing is that Cleveland, even with all this adversity, they're sitting at 7-4. The Browns, all this adversity, they're still in the playoff picture. They're 7-4. They control their own destiny. That is why it is so important to start the season quick. If the Bengals started off their season quick and say they were 7-4, I'd have a lot more confidence in them possibly making a playoff push as well. But the Bengals started off slow. Cleveland did not. That's the difference. Bengals and the Browns have both been banged up, both offensively and defensively, all season long. You know the difference between those two teams? Browns got off to a great start. The Bengals did not. Guess who played in week 1? The Bengals and Browns. Guess who won that game? The Browns. The Browns set the tone for their season. The Bengals did not. When you look at what the Browns bring to the table, they are 7-4. They still control their own destiny. They're right there in the thick of things. The only question is how far is this injury bug going to plague the Cleveland Browns? Matt, we talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers schedule coming up, and in my opinion, I don't necessarily know if you agree with this, but I think that at the end of the season, there's ultimately going to be one more spot open in the playoffs. I think you're going to have the second place finisher in the AFC East and the second place finisher in the AFC South get the first 2 wildcard spots, or 2 of the 3 wildcard spots. That last spot, again, we talk about Indianapolis being in the running. You have Denver now back in the running. You have Cleveland in the running, and you have Pittsburgh in the running. Pittsburgh, I have not been impressed with them whatsoever outside of that defense this season. But Matt, some odd reason, Pittsburgh has won games. And you know what? That's what good teams do. It doesn't have to be pretty, but you know what? In the NFL, a win is a win. That's exactly what the Steelers have done. Let's look at their upcoming schedule. Arizona and then New England. Two of the worst teams in the National Football League. Then you have Indianapolis, December 17th. That game circled on my calendar. That game could have a lot of playoff implications. You have a Jake Browning-led Cincinnati Bengals, and then you have two tough teams to end the season, Seattle, Baltimore. You already beat Baltimore this season. The three biggest games that Pittsburgh plays, Indianapolis, Seattle, Baltimore. If they could take two of those three and beat the teams that they should, such as Arizona, Cincinnati, and New England, I think this is a Pittsburgh team that's going to find themselves in the playoffs as well, even with their struggles on offense. That defense is insane. And again, we talk about it. It's the NFL. It's hard to win. It doesn't matter how you get it done. It doesn't matter how you get there. It matters what you do when you're there. And that's exactly what Pittsburgh has been able to show. Have they won games pretty on paper? Absolutely not. Have they won games? Yeah, they have. And they're 7-4 just like the Browns. That really goes into the main debate. Pittsburgh, easy schedule upcoming. The Steelers, they might be able to make a push at the playoffs. And not only the playoffs, if Baltimore starts to stumble a little bit here through the last month and a half of the regular season, Pittsburgh, we may be able to see them against that on January 7th at Baltimore. Maybe that has higher stakes for a divisional game. We're waiting to see how it plays out. Still a lot of football to be played.
And yeah, taking a look at the kind of window for the postseason for the wild card teams, talking about this Browns team dealing with all of the injuries that they've had so far this season, I would say 4 wins of their last 6 games of the season. Obviously, it's the AFC. It's a very tough division to be playing in, or conference to be playing in, but I would say if the Browns can get to an 11-win season, I think that should get them into the postseason. Same can be said with the Steelers. If they get up to around 11 wins, I think that can lock them into the postseason. Taking a look at the remaining teams, I would say of the teams that are on the outside looking in currently on the window for the playoffs, at least in the AFC, I think the Texans have a really good shot to climb their way out of the hole, get themselves in it. I think the Bills have an argument, and they have a chance to potentially claw their way up and make it into the wild card. I would say the Chargers, if they didn't lose to the Ravens, they're 4-7 on the season right now. They haven't looked amazing so far this season, at least when it comes to that defense. The offense has looked good. The defense has had its struggles, but I would say you've got the Broncos, they're at 9 right now. You've got the Bengals, they're at 11. I wouldn't say it's impossible for those two teams to potentially make it into the wild card, but you just take a look at what both teams have been able to do this season. Obviously, the Broncos, they're probably one of the, if not the hottest teams in the NFL right now on the 5-game winning streak that they're on, but streaks come to an end in the NFL pretty quickly when they get started. So I'm not saying that means the Broncos aren't going to make it into the postseason, because they've gotten themselves up to 6-5. They've gotten themselves into the conversation throughout these past 5 games. Then you got the Colts. They're the 7th seed right now. They sit at 6-5. It's crazy to see all the teams and how close this AFC is going. The AFC conference is going to be, because you take a look at it for the wild card. You've got 6 teams separated by a game and a half right now. The fight for the playoffs and the fight for the wild card in the AFC, it's going to be chaos throughout the last 6 weeks of this season.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one to watch. And obviously, Buffalo, they're on the outside looking in 6-6. But again, they proved to me, at least, that they can hang with some of the top teams in the NFL. Tough schedule, though, for Buffalo. Tough sledding ahead. We'll wait and see how it plays out. Time for a break. When we come back, we'll close out this 2-hour show. It's all coming up next on Sports Now.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington here on Sports Now. Time is 5:57. We still have just a couple more minutes left in this show. And Matt, we're talking about the entirety. We talk about the college football playoff and the insanity that we're going to see in college football. The same can be said for the NFL. And we haven't even talked about the NFC. In the NFC, a 5-6 Atlanta Falcons team right now, if the season were to end today, would be hosting a playoff game. It's crazy. But you're going to have teams on the outside looking in that will have a couple games over 500 in the AFC.
Yeah, you've got...
Insane.
Taking a look at it right now, you've got the Falcons, and the reason that they are in the playoffs is because they are 5-6, and they are the best team in the NFC South. The second best team is tied with them at 5-6, and that's the Saints. And then you got the Buccaneers at 4-7. Then you got the Panthers, who I think were the first team eliminated from the playoffs, and there's no chance of them making it.
I thought they were going to win it all.
They're 1-10 right now. Then you take a look over at the AFC side. Obviously, the Bills haven't had a bye week yet. I think that's this upcoming week for the Bills, but 6-6 Bills as the 10 seed right now. You have the Broncos at 6-5, the Texans at 6-5. All three of those teams are on the outside looking in on the postseason for the AFC. It's crazy.
A lot to unfold. Hey, it's that time of the year. It's football season. Matt, we haven't talked basketball in a while. It's coming up tomorrow. College basketball, NBA basketball, and more. Coming up tomorrow, Sports Now, 4 to 6 p.m. right here on any TKDS Sports Network social media page. Make sure to follow us on our social media pages as well. Matt at mpennington88, myself at Jackson Lightcap, and TKDS Sports. TKDS Sports. Until then, thanks for dealing with us. We'll talk to you tomorrow.